The cold morning had come quietly over the mountain town. Thick clouds hung low and the air smelled like ice and pine. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter around him as he stepped outside his small wooden cabin. The snow reached halfway up the fence and the wind carried tiny crystals that bit at his face. He had promised the town's electric company to check a broken power line after last night's heavy storm. It was his routine work, nothing special. Drive up to the ridge, check the poles, fix whatever had been damaged. But that morning would change his life forever, though he didn't know it yet. His old truck groaned as it climbed the steep path, tires crunching over frozen ground. The windshield wipers fought against the snowflakes that kept falling thicker with every mile. Daniel hummed softly to himself, trying to keep his focus. He was used to being alone, used to silence and the mountain roads, but something in the air felt strange that day. It was too quiet. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. He parked near the bend where the road ended, grabbed his tool bag and began to walk. The snow came up to his knees in places. He could hear the slow creak of the trees under the weight of ice. Then in the distance he saw something, a small dark shape lying near the creek bed, half hidden beneath a layer of snow. He stopped, narrowing his eyes. Maybe it was a fallen branch, he thought, but something about it felt off. It didn't look like part of the forest. It looked soft, uneven, almost like fabric. Curiosity pushed him forward. His boots sank deep with every step. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. It was not a branch. It was a person. His heart jumped into his throat. For a moment he couldn't move. The figure lay on its side, covered with frost, hair tangled and stiff from the cold. A hand was barely visible above the snow, pale and still. Daniel dropped his tools and ran the last few steps. Hey, can you hear me?" he shouted, kneeling down. No answer. His hands shook as he brushed away the snow from her face. It was a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, skin white as the snow around her, lips slightly blue. Her clothes were soaked and torn, her shoes missing. Her body looked lifeless, but when Daniel leaned close, he felt it, the faintest breath against his cheek. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Without thinking twice, Daniel shrugged off his thick jacket and wrapped it around her body. "You're okay. You're gonna be okay," he whispered, though fear knotted his stomach. He had no idea who she was, how long she had been there or what had happened, but he knew one thing. If he didn't move fast, she wouldn't make it. He lifted her into his arms. She was light, fragile, like she could vanish in the wind. Snowflakes landed on her hair and melted into tiny drops. Daniel struggled to keep his balance on the slippery slope. The truck was far, and his breath came out in harsh gasps as he pushed forward, each step harder than the last. The road was slick and the wind grew stronger, but he refused to stop. He kept whispering to her, telling her she would be fine, that she wasn't alone anymore. By the time he reached his truck, his arms were numb. He laid her carefully on the seat, turned the heater to full, and covered her with an old blanket from the back. Her fingers were stiff, her pulse weak. He rubbed her hands between his to warm them. "Stay with me, please," he said quietly. The snowstorm started again, blurring the world outside the windshield. He drove carefully, tires sliding at times, the road barely visible. It took almost 40 minutes to reach the small clinic on the edge of town. Daniel jumped out and carried her inside, calling for help. The nurse behind the counter froze for a second before rushing to bring a stretcher. Within moments, the doctor and 2 nurses were working around her, checking her pulse, temperature, and breathing. Daniel stood nearby, shaking from cold and worry. "Where did you find her?" the doctor asked without looking up. "Near the creek. She was half buried in snow," Daniel answered. "No ID, no bag, nothing." The doctor nodded grimly. "She's lucky you found her. Another hour out there and she'd be gone." Those words made Daniel's chest tighten. He sat on a bench near the hallway while they treated her. Time felt slow, almost frozen. Through the window, the storm still raged, covering the road again. He stared at his hands, still red from the cold, still trembling from what he had just seen. Hours passed before a nurse came to tell him she was alive but unconscious. Her body temperature had dropped dangerously low, but they managed to stabilize her. Daniel let out a long breath he didn't realize he was holding. Relief washed over him. He didn't even know her name, but he felt deeply connected to her already, as if fate had chosen him to find her. He stayed there late into the night. The clinic was small and quiet, the only sound the soft hum of machines and the slow drip of IV lines. Daniel sat by her bed looking at the girl's peaceful face. Her features were delicate, with long lashes resting against pale skin, and a few strands of brown hair spread across the pillow. She looked calm now, but her hands still twitched slightly as if she were dreaming. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered softly. "And how did you end up out there?" She didn't answer, of course. But as he sat there, he noticed something strange. A small pendant hung around her neck, half hidden by the hospital gown. It was a silver charm in the shape of a snowflake, old but beautiful. He gently turned it over and saw faint letters carved on the back. The engraving was worn, but he could make out part of it. Emma. Maybe that was her name. Emma. He placed it back gently and leaned against the chair, exhaustion catching up to him. Outside, the snowstorm had finally begun to fade. The town lights shimmered through the mist like distant stars. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to rest. He didn't know why he couldn't leave. Maybe because something about her face felt familiar. Maybe because saving her felt like more than just luck. When dawn arrived, the first light of morning slipped through the window. The storm had passed, leaving everything covered in white silence. Daniel woke to the soft sound of movement. He opened his eyes and the girl had stirred. Her fingers moved slightly and her head turned on the pillow. Then slowly her eyes opened. For a moment she looked lost, confused, staring at the ceiling. Then her gaze shifted toward him. Their eyes met. Hers deep and uncertain, his tired and full of relief. She tried to speak, her lips dry and trembling. Daniel leaned forward, ready to call the nurse. But then he froze. Her voice came out weak, barely a whisper. "Daniel." He felt his breath catch. He hadn't told her his name. No one had. For a long moment they just stared at each other, both silent, both shocked. The room felt heavy, filled with something neither of them could explain. She blinked slowly, trying to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled her back into sleep. Daniel sat frozen, his heart beating fast. How could she know his name? They had never met before. He looked at her face again, searching for any memory, but nothing came. Still, deep down he felt it, a strange connection. Like an invisible thread had tied their lives together long before that snowy morning. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the frozen mountains, casting golden light across the snow. Inside that small clinic room, a mystery had begun that neither of them could yet understand. But Daniel knew one thing for sure. The girl he had found in the snow was no stranger. And whatever bound them together had just awakened. 2 days had passed since Daniel found the girl in the snow. The storm had ended, leaving the mountains covered in white calmness. The town returned to its quiet rhythm, but Daniel's thoughts stayed in that small clinic room. Every morning after checking his work, he stopped by to see her. The nurses had started calling her Emma, the name Daniel guessed from the pendant she wore. It suited her, soft and gentle, though no one knew if it was really hers. She was still weak, but her color had returned a little. The doctor said she would live, though her memory seemed lost. She couldn't remember her name, her home, or how she ended up in the snow. Only fragments flashed in her mind. Headlights, a loud crash, and cold wind. Whenever she tried to think harder, pain struck her head and she closed her eyes. Daniel sat beside her, watching quietly. He wasn't used to spending time in hospitals or talking to strangers, but something about her pulled him in. The first time she opened her eyes and spoke his name, he hadn't been able to sleep all night. He kept asking himself how she could possibly know it. Maybe she heard someone say it, he told himself. Maybe he'd dropped his ID and she saw it, but deep down he knew none of that was true. The nurse, Mrs. Clara, noticed how Daniel came every day. One afternoon she smiled at him and said, "You can stay if you want. She seems calm when you're here." Daniel smiled shyly. "I don't want to disturb her." "You're not," the nurse replied softly. "Sometimes people feel things before they remember them. Maybe she feels safe because of you." That thought stayed with him. He sat quietly near Emma's bed as the snow fell outside the window. She slept most of the time, her breathing slow and peaceful. But every now and then she would open her eyes, look at him, and smile faintly as if she recognized him. It warmed his heart every time. When she began to speak more, Daniel asked simple questions. "Do you remember anything about where you were before this?" She shook her head slowly. "No, just the cold. I remember running and a light." "Then nothing," he nodded, not pushing her. "That's okay. It'll come back when it's ready." Sometimes they just sat together in silence. Daniel told her small stories. about his work fixing power lines, about his dog that ran away last winter, about how the mountain town stayed the same no matter how many storms came. She listened with a soft smile, even though her eyes often looked far away, like she was searching for something she couldn't see. A few days later, the police came to speak with her. They brought photos and questions, missing person reports from nearby towns, names of travelers caught in the storm. Emma looked through the pictures carefully, but none of the faces sparked a memory. The officer thanked her and left, but Daniel saw the sadness in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly when they were alone. "They were hoping I'd remember someone." "It's not your fault," Daniel replied. "Your mind's been through a lot. It'll take time." She nodded and looked out the window. The snow was starting again, light and slow. "I don't even know where I belong," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You belong here for now. You're safe. That's what matters." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a hint of peace in her expression. Days turned into weeks. Emma got stronger, walking slowly around the clinic with help. Her smile became brighter, her laughter more natural. The townspeople began to hear about the story, how Daniel had found a girl half buried in the snow and saved her life. Some called it luck, others called it fate. Daniel didn't know what to call it. He only knew he couldn't stop thinking about her. One evening after work, he brought her a small box of chocolates from the local store. When she saw it, her eyes lit up. "You didn't have to," she said softly. "I know," he replied, smiling. "But you looked like you needed something sweet." They shared the chocolates while talking. It felt simple and warm, like two old friends catching up. But then, as they talked about small things, food, books, music, Emma said something that made Daniel pause. "I feel like I've heard your voice before," she said suddenly. "Even before that day. It's strange, but when you speak it feels familiar, like I've known you for a long time." Daniel froze, his hand halfway to the table. He forced a small laugh. "Maybe I just have one of those voices." But she shook her head. "No, it's more than that. I see flashes sometimes. A road, a car, headlights, and someone shouting. A man's voice, yours." Daniel's heart beat faster. He looked down, remembering his own past, the accident years ago, the icy road, and the rescue team that found him. He had never known who the volunteer was who pulled him out of his wrecked car. Could it be her? No, it didn't make sense. That had been years ago. She would have been too young, and yet something inside him said not to dismiss it so quickly. He changed the topic, asking her about the pendant she wore. "That necklace," he said. "Do you remember where it came from?" Emma touched it gently. "It feels important. Like it means something, but I can't remember who gave it to me, only that I never took it off." Daniel smiled softly. "Then keep it close. Maybe it'll help you remember." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat by his window staring at the snow outside. The same mountain that once almost took his life had now brought someone back into it. He didn't understand why, but he felt as if something bigger than both of them was unfolding. The next morning, Emma woke up early. She walked slowly to the window, watching the sunlight reflect off the snow-covered trees. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid. The fear that had followed her since the day she woke up was fading. She thought about Daniel, his quiet smile, the way he always stayed near, his calm voice. She didn't know why, but his presence made her feel safe, like she'd known him in another life. Later that day, the nurse told her Daniel had gone to fix another power line outside town. The storm the night before had damaged several poles again. Emma smiled faintly, wondering if he was okay out there. She picked up a small piece of paper from the nightstand and began to draw. The view from her window, the mountains, and a tiny figure walking through the snow. When Daniel returned that evening, tired and covered in frost, she showed it to him shyly. "It's beautiful," he said with genuine surprise. "You drew this?" She nodded, her cheeks turning red. "I think I used to draw a lot before all this." He looked at the paper again, at the small figure in the snow. "Looks like me," he said, smiling. She laughed softly. "Maybe it is." As the days passed, small things started to return to her. Not full memories, but feelings. Flashes of something that had once been part of her life. The way she tied her hair, how she liked her tea, songs she could hum but not name. Daniel noticed everything, and each time she remembered something, he felt strangely proud, as if her recovery was also his. But one evening, as she sat by the fire in the small lounge, a sudden image flashed in her mind. Bright lights, metal crunching, and a man shouting her name. Her heart raced. She gripped the arm of the chair tightly. The man's voice sounded just like Daniel's. She gasped softly, her mind spinning. When Daniel came in a moment later, she looked at him differently. "I saw something," she whispered. "A crash, a road, and you. You were there." Daniel's eyes widened. He sat beside her, unsure what to say. "Maybe it's just your mind mixing memories," he said carefully. But deep inside, both of them knew it was more than that. The way she'd said his name the moment she woke up, the flashes she kept seeing, it couldn't be a coincidence. As the fire crackled softly and snow fell outside, neither of them spoke again. They sat in silence, their thoughts heavy but connected, like two pieces of the same story slowly finding their way back together. Outside, the wind began to rise once more, carrying flakes that danced through the night. Somewhere beyond the mountain road, the past was waiting, a truth buried under years of snow waiting for the moment to come to light. The winter in the small mountain town slowly began to ease. The sky stayed gray most days, but the roads were no longer hidden under deep snow. Life returned to normal for everyone except Daniel and Emma. They both felt as if something invisible connected them, something that neither of them could explain yet. Emma was recovering well now. She could walk without help and her strength had returned, but her memory still came and went like waves. Sometimes she remembered simple things, the smell of coffee, the sound of rain on a window, the way it felt to drive a car. Other times her mind was blank, as if a thick fog hid her past behind it. Daniel kept visiting her every day, and it became their quiet routine. He would bring her books from the library or small things she could draw with. She had started sketching again, and her drawings always showed mountains, trees, and sometimes a lonely figure standing in the snow. When Daniel asked her about it, she would smile and say, "I don't know who it is, but it feels like someone waiting for me." One afternoon, when the sun finally came out after many cloudy days, the police officer who had handled Emma's case returned to the clinic. His name was Officer Reed, a kind man in his 50s with a tired smile. He carried a small folder under his arm. "Morning, Daniel," he said, nodding. "And Emma, I might have something for you." Daniel stood beside her as the officer sat down. He opened the folder carefully and placed a few photographs on the table. "We found a crashed car up by Ridge Point. The snow kept it hidden until now. It went off the road and rolled down the hill. There was blood inside, but no one in it when we arrived. The vehicle belonged to a woman reported missing 3 towns away." Emma stared at the pictures, her hand trembling slightly. The wreck looked terrible. A silver car crushed between rocks and trees. Something about it felt familiar, but she couldn't be sure. The officer looked at her gently. "Does this car look familiar to you?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Maybe, I don't know. It's like I've seen it in a dream." Reed sighed and closed the folder. "That's okay. We'll keep looking. Sometimes memories come back when you least expect them." After he left, Emma sat in silence. Daniel placed a cup of warm tea beside her, watching her carefully. She didn't speak for a long time. Then softly she said, "What if I was in that car?" Daniel frowned. "You can't be sure yet," she nodded slowly. "But I feel it. When I look at those pictures, I feel something heavy, like I was there." Daniel didn't know what to say. He wanted to comfort her, but he also didn't want to fill her head with more questions. "Whatever happened," he said softly, "you survived. That's what matters most." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes. Headlights cutting through heavy snow, a sharp turn, someone shouting her name, and then darkness. She woke up sweating, her heart racing. She looked out the window and saw the snow falling again, slow and peaceful. But her mind was full of noise and confusion. The next morning, Daniel found her sitting in the small garden behind the clinic, wrapped in a blanket. The cold didn't seem to bother her. He sat beside her quietly. "I had dreams again," she said softly. "About a road." "About you." Daniel's heart jumped. "About me?" She nodded. "I think you were there. I saw your face in the snow like that night. But it wasn't now. It felt like long ago." Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked down at his gloved hands. "There's something I never told you," he said slowly. A few years back, I had an accident on that same mountain road. My truck slid on the ice and rolled into a ditch. I was stuck there for hours until a volunteer rescue team found me. I never saw the person who saved me. I just remember a woman's voice calling my name before I passed out. When I woke up, she was gone. Emma's eyes widened. A woman's voice? He nodded. Yeah, I always wondered who she was. The team said one of their volunteers got separated during the storm and was never found. They searched for days, but she disappeared. Emma's hands began to shake. She whispered, "Daniel, what if that was me?" Daniel stared at her, speechless. For a moment, the world around them felt still. The thought was almost impossible, that the woman who saved his life years ago was the same one he had just saved. But the more he looked at her, the more he felt it could be true. They spent the next few days trying to make sense of it. Daniel called the rescue department from that time, asking for records of the volunteers who went missing during the storm. They promised to check the archives. Emma waited anxiously for news. Every night she dreamed of the same scene: blinding snow, a broken car, and a man trapped inside calling for help. She could never see his face clearly, but she always felt warmth and fear together in that moment. One morning, Officer Reed returned again, this time with another file. He looked serious but gentle as always. "We checked old reports from 5 years ago," he said. There was indeed a volunteer rescuer named Emma Wallace who disappeared during a storm while helping a man from a crashed truck. Her body was never found. The case was closed when the snow buried most of the area. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. Emma froze, her eyes filling with tears. Reed continued softly. The man she rescued survived. His name was Daniel Carter. The room went quiet. Only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. Daniel turned to her slowly. "Emma Wallace," he whispered. "That's you." She covered her mouth with her hand. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't move. Memories flooded her mind all at once. The blizzard, the broken car, the sound of his voice calling for help. Her running toward him through the snow, the pain in her chest as the cold took over. She had been that rescuer. She had saved him and vanished in the same storm. Daniel reached out and took her hand. "You saved my life," he said softly. "And now somehow I found you and saved yours." She looked at him through tears, her voice trembling. "How is that possible?" "I don't know," he said. "But maybe we were meant to meet again." That evening they sat together near the fireplace of the clinic, the flames flickering softly. Neither spoke much. Words felt too small for what they had discovered. Daniel looked at her and remembered the years he had spent wondering who had rescued him, feeling guilty that he never thanked her. Now she sat right beside him, alive but lost for years in a strange circle of fate. Emma wiped her tears and whispered, "I remember your truck. I remember pulling you out. You were hurt and cold. You kept saying you couldn't move, and I told you to hold on. Then everything went black." Daniel nodded, his voice low. "When I woke up, they told me a volunteer had gone missing trying to reach me. I wanted to help search, but they said the storm was too dangerous. I thought you were gone forever." She leaned closer, her eyes soft. "Maybe we both were in different ways." They sat like that for a long time, saying nothing, just listening to the quiet hum of the fire. Outside, snow began to fall again, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt peaceful, like a story completing itself. Later that night, when Emma went to her room, she stood by the window, looking at the white hills under the moonlight. The same mountains that had once taken everything from her had somehow brought her back to the man whose life she had once saved. Life had come full circle, and deep inside she knew that whatever had connected them wasn't by chance. It was something meant to be. And as Daniel walked home through the soft snow, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know who he was thanking, fate, time, or something beyond both. But he knew he was grateful. The mountain that had once almost taken his life had given him back something far greater. The answer to the mystery that haunted him for years, and the person who had risked everything to save him. The morning after Emma learned who she really was, everything felt different. The snow outside glowed softly under the pale sun, and the whole town seemed calm, as if nature itself had paused to breathe. Inside the small clinic, however, both Daniel and Emma were silent, lost in thoughts too heavy to speak out loud. Daniel sat by her bedside, his hands clasped together. He kept replaying the officer's words in his head. The woman who saved him 5 years ago, the one he thought was gone forever, had been sitting before him all this time, alive, with no memory of who she was. It was too strange to believe, yet every part of it felt real. Emma looked down at her hands, her eyes full of confusion and wonder. "I don't understand how it's possible," she whispered. "I was lost in that storm. I remember falling, the cold taking over. I thought that was the end." Daniel nodded slowly. "And somehow, years later, I found you in the same place, half buried in the snow, like you had been waiting there all this time." She met his eyes, her voice trembling. "Do you think something kept me alive?" Daniel didn't have an answer. He only knew that nothing about their story followed the normal rules of life. It was as if time had bent for them, circling back to give them another chance. A few days later, Officer Reed returned again, this time carrying a thick envelope. "We found the official records," he said, handing it to Emma. "It's everything we have on your case. Photographs, reports, search maps. Maybe something here will help you remember more." Emma hesitated before opening it. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out the papers. The first photo showed her younger self, smiling in a rescue uniform beside a red truck. There was snow behind her, and in the corner of the photo, a blurred figure that looked oddly like Daniel's old pickup. She stared at it for a long time, her throat tight. Daniel leaned closer. "That was the day before my accident," he said quietly. "I remember that same snowstorm." Emma flipped through the papers, reading the notes written by the rescue team years ago. Volunteer Emma Wallace, last seen near Ridge Point. Believed lost in avalanche during rescue operation. Her eyes filled with tears. "I was there," she whispered. "I was trying to find you." Daniel placed a hand gently on hers. "And you did. You saved me." For a long time they just sat together, the air between them heavy with old memories returning to life. Emma turned the last page and froze. There, attached to the report, was a small faded photo taken days after the storm. It showed a group of rescuers standing near a pile of snow and broken branches. The caption read, "Search site of missing volunteer, no remains found." She closed the folder and pressed it to her chest. Tears slid down her face silently. Daniel stood unsure of what to say. He wanted to comfort her, but he also knew she needed to feel this moment, the weight of her past, the reality of what she had gone through. That night, Daniel stayed late at the clinic again. He found her sitting near the fireplace, staring into the flames. She didn't look sad now, just thoughtful. "It's strange," she said softly. "I remember everything now, the storm, the crash, finding you. I remember holding your hand and telling you not to give up. Then I fell and everything went dark." Daniel's voice was low. "And 5 years later I found you the same way, in the snow. Like the mountain gave you back to me." She looked up, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Maybe it wasn't the mountain," she said gently. "Maybe it was something greater. Maybe we weren't finished yet." The next morning the doctor told Emma she could finally be discharged. She had recovered completely, and the police had closed her case. She was free to start again wherever she wanted. But Emma didn't know where to go. Her old life felt distant now, like it belonged to another person. When Daniel came to visit, she smiled faintly. "They said I can leave today." He nodded, though he felt an ache in his chest. "That's good news. You deserve a new start." She hesitated before speaking. "But I don't know where to start. I don't even have a home anymore." Daniel thought for a moment. "You could stay here for a while," he said carefully. "The mountains aren't easy to live with, but they're peaceful. You could stay in the guest cabin near my place. It's warm and it's quiet. Until you decide what you want to do next." Her eyes softened. "You'd really let me stay?" "Of course," he said. "You saved my life once. Maybe it's my turn to return the kindness." And so Emma moved into the small wooden cabin a short walk from Daniel's home. It was simple but cozy, with a stone fireplace and a view of the forest below. Daniel helped her settle in, bringing firewood, blankets, and groceries. They spent evenings drinking tea and watching the snow fall through the window. Slowly, peace returned to her heart. But sometimes, late at night, she still woke up from dreams of snowstorms and distant voices calling her name. She would step outside and see Daniel's cabin light glowing faintly through the trees, and that light always calmed her. One evening, she decided to visit him. The path between their homes was covered in thin ice, and she walked carefully, holding a lantern. When she reached his porch, she saw him sitting by the fire inside, reading an old book. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, the dreams again." Daniel poured her a cup of hot tea and handed it to her. "Maybe they're not dreams," he said softly. "Maybe they're memories trying to remind you of how far you've come." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. But they always end the same way, on me falling and everything turning white." He looked into her eyes. "But this time you didn't fall. You came back." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire dance. The air between them felt full of unspoken words, a gratitude, loss, and something deeper neither dared to name. Finally, Emma spoke. "Do you ever think things happen for a reason?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I used to think life was just a line. You move forward, you survive, and that's it. But after meeting you again, I'm not so sure. Maybe life moves in circles. Maybe we find the people we're meant to no matter how far we get lost." Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. "When I first opened my eyes in the clinic," she said, "I didn't know who I was. But I knew your name. I think some part of me never forgot you, even when my mind did." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her how many nights he had dreamed about the unknown rescuer, how many times he had imagined saying thank you. But now words felt too small. Instead, he reached out and gently held her hand. She didn't pull away. For a moment, everything was still. The fire crackled softly and the snow fell outside, covering the world in silence. When she finally spoke again, her voice was calm. "Maybe this was the reason I survived that night," she said. "So that one day I could find my way back to you." Daniel's eyes softened. "Maybe it was so I could finally tell you thank you." The clock ticked quietly on the wall as they sat together. Neither wanted to break the peace of that moment. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the windows, carrying the faint sound of the forest. Quiet, steady, alive. That night, as Emma walked back to her cabin, she looked up at the stars shining above the mountains. They looked brighter than she had ever seen them before. She smiled to herself, feeling warmth spread through her chest. The mountain had taken her once, but now it had given her something back. A new beginning, and someone who understood her without words. Back in his cabin, Daniel watched her lantern light disappear into the trees. He thought about everything that had happened. The storm, the years, the impossible second meeting. It all felt like a story that no one would ever believe. Yet it was his truth. He whispered quietly to the empty room. She came back. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the night sky seemed to listen, holding their story like a secret written in snow and stars. A promise that some bonds are never truly broken. Not by time, not by storms, and not even by fate itself. The snow began to melt as spring slowly touched the mountain town. The icy roads softened into muddy paths, and the frozen lake started to shimmer again under the sunlight. The cold wind that once bit through the trees now carried the smell of wet earth and pine needles. After months of storms and silence, life returned to the hills. For Emma, each sunrise felt like a quiet miracle. Every morning she woke up to the sound of birds, the warmth of sunlight spilling through the window of her small cabin, and the peace she had never known before. Sometimes she still dreamed about the snow, the night she had fallen, the darkness that followed. But now those dreams no longer frightened her. They felt like reminders of how far she had come. Daniel often came by to check on her, pretending it was just to bring firewood or fix something small around the cabin, but deep down they both knew he came because he couldn't stay away. He enjoyed hearing her laughter echo through the valley and seeing the calm return to her eyes. One morning he knocked on her door holding 2 mugs of coffee. "The view's nice today," he said with a small smile. "Thought you might want to see it." Emma stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The world stretched before them, hills turning green again, water running in thin streams between the rocks, sunlight catching on the last bits of melting snow. She breathed deeply, her eyes soft. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It almost feels like the mountain is waking up." Daniel nodded. "It feels alive again." "Just like you," she smiled, glancing at him. "Maybe like us." They sat on the steps together, drinking in silence. The air was cold but not sharp anymore. A soft wind played with her hair, and for a long time neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that didn't need words. Peaceful, full of understanding. As days passed, they began to share more of their lives with each other. Emma told him about the small things she remembered from before the storm. Her favorite songs, the taste of summer peaches, the way her father used to make tea too strong but always said it was perfect. Daniel told her about his lonely years after the accident, about how he stayed in the mountains because the silence helped him think. After the crash, he said one evening, I stopped talking much. I didn't know why I survived when someone else didn't. It felt unfair. Emma looked at him, her voice soft. You survived because you still had something left to do. Maybe finding me was part of that. He smiled faintly. And maybe bringing you home was what I was meant to do. Their days followed a quiet rhythm after that. They walked through the forest trails, visited the town market, and shared small meals in the evenings. Daniel repaired fences while Emma planted wildflowers beside her porch. Every day the bond between them grew stronger, not through grand gestures but through simple moments, shared smiles, quiet talks, and the comfort of not needing to explain what the other already understood. One afternoon, as they hiked to the ridge overlooking the valley, the same place where they had both nearly lost their lives years apart, Emma stopped suddenly. The wind blew softly, and she looked down at the vast expanse of green and white below them. This is where it happened, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Yeah, right below that slope. She turned toward him, her eyes thoughtful. Do you ever think about how strange it is? The same mountain, the same storm, and yet somehow it brought us back to each other. He looked out over the ridge, the sunlight glinting off the snow. Maybe the mountain never wanted to take us, he said. Maybe it just wanted us to find each other. She smiled softly, and for a moment her eyes shimmered with tears. When I was lying in the snow that night, I remember feeling something warm, even though I was freezing. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was your name. Daniel's heart tightened. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. And when I found you, I remember thinking you were an angel. Not just because you were there, but because I'd stopped believing in miracles until that moment. Emma laughed quietly through her tears. Maybe we're each other's miracles. They stood there for a long time, watching the clouds move slowly across the sky. Below them, the trees swayed gently and the world felt new again. Weeks passed and life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The townspeople often talked about them, the man and the woman whose lives had crossed twice in impossible ways. Some called it destiny. Others said it was a story fit for legends, but Daniel and Emma didn't care what others called it. For them, it was just life, quiet, honest, and real. As spring deepened, Daniel started building a small wooden fence around her garden. One morning, he arrived early with a bag of seeds and tools. I thought we could plant something together, he said. Emma looked at the bag and smiled. What are they? Wildflowers, he said. They'll grow fast and spread everywhere, the kind that last through any weather. They spent the day planting, laughing as the dirt stuck to their hands. When the work was done, they sat under a tree watching the gentle breeze move through the valley. Emma looked at the small patches of earth where they had planted the seeds. They'll bloom soon, she said. Daniel nodded. Just like you did. That evening, when he was about to leave, Emma stopped him. Daniel, she said softly, you don't have to thank me anymore for what happened years ago. You've already done more than I ever could. He turned toward her, his eyes warm. I'll still thank you every day. Because if you hadn't saved me then, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have met you again. She smiled and took a deep breath, her heart full. Maybe that's how it was always meant to be. The months went by quietly. Flowers began to bloom around the cabin, painting the hillside in colors of pink, yellow, and white. Emma spent her mornings tending to them while Daniel worked nearby. Sometimes they'd stop for lunch sitting under the same tree, talking about simple things, the weather, the town, the future. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and gold, Emma looked at Daniel and said, Do you ever wonder what's next for us? He smiled. No, he said simply. For the first time, I don't need to. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. She nodded, her eyes shining. The air was still, the world bathed in the soft light of sunset. She reached out and took his hand, and he didn't let go. They stayed like that as the sky darkened, and the stars appeared one by one, lighting the night gently like memories reborn. In the weeks that followed, Emma's story spread quietly through nearby towns. People came to see the place where she had been found, the frozen creek that had once held her still heart, now flowing again with clear water. Some said the mountain had blessed the two souls who had both faced death and found each other again. But Daniel and Emma didn't need stories or attention. They only needed the life they had, The quiet mornings, the sound of the wind through the trees, the peace that came from knowing they had both been given a second chance. One morning, as the first rays of summer light fell on the valley, Emma stood outside with a cup of tea in her hands. The wildflowers had bloomed fully, spreading across the hillside like a living carpet of color. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. Daniel stood there smiling, holding a small wooden carving in his hand. "I made this for you," he said. It was a small snowflake carved out of wood, smooth and delicate, shaped like the pendant she had worn when he first found her. She took it gently, her fingers tracing the edges. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He smiled softly. "A reminder," he said, "of everything we survived." She looked at him with tears in her eyes, then placed the carving beside the original silver pendant on her table. Both symbols of their story, one from the night everything changed and one from the life they built after. As they stood together, the sunlight spilling over the hills, the world seemed silent and whole. The snow that had once nearly taken everything from them had melted away, leaving behind something rare, a bond born of courage, loss, and love. Emma looked up at Daniel, her voice quiet but steady. "Maybe we were both buried in the snow," she said softly, "but we found each other there too." Daniel smiled, his voice low. "And we'll never be lost again." The wind moved gently through the flowers, carrying their laughter down the valley. Above them, the mountains stood tall and silent, keeping their secret. The story of two souls who met in the cold, were separated by fate, and found their way back when the world least expected it. And as another season began, Daniel and Emma walked hand in hand down the trail, their footprints side by side in the soft earth, heading toward a future as bright and warm as the morning sun rising over the mountain that had once been their storm.